Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Creation Corner with your host, David McNabb. I have a very special guest with me today. But first, we're going to look at a few quotes here that I wanted to share with you. Thought you'd like this. From Tom Brokaw, he says, "It's easy to make a buck. It's much harder to make a difference." And Andy Rooney said, Everyone wants to live on top of the mountain, but all the happiness and growth occurs while you are climbing it. Andy Rooney was quite a clever guy, wasn't he? And also said, being kind is more important than being right. And that's a good one too, isn't it? And I love this one. This is from a German fighter pilot trainer in World War II. He said to his trainees, "If I ever see or hear of you shooting a man in a parachute, I will shoot you myself. You follow the rules of war for you, not for your enemy. You fight by rules to keep your humanity." Isn't that the truth? I wish that we all would keep our humanity and live by those rules. I do a resource recommend at the beginning of the show. So today, my special guest is Dr. Thomas Kindell, and I'm recommending a couple of his DVDs. This is Refuting Textbook Arguments for Evolution 1 and 2. There's so much information about what to refute in the textbook. He had to do 2 DVD talks about this. And we'll ask him about that in the show here just a little bit later on. But first, I want to, as we always try to do here on the Creation Corner, is just give you a little bit of information about what the kids are being taught in high school. Here's the Prescott High School biology book. It's the 2006 Apprentice Hall called Biology. And this is on page 382. It says, "Descent with modification also implies that all living organisms are related to one another." It does? It implies that? Because I don't think it implies that at all. Look back in time and you will find common ancestors shared by tigers, panthers, and cheetahs. Oh, here's a completely different box of worms here. Okay, yeah, they're talking about kinds. Remember in first chapter of Genesis, 10 times it says God created the kinds of animals. Okay? Tigers, panthers, and cheetahs are one kind of animal, aren't they? They're big cats. And so when the big cats, they diversified into different kinds of cats, which we now call different species, that does not imply that there was a common ancestor at some point millions of years ago. Okay? Descent with modification also implies that all living organisms are related to one another. How? What's your evidence? It doesn't imply that. Why don't you show any evidence? The reason they don't show evidence, folks, is because they don't have any. Okay? And they're telling the kids all the time, this is a fact. Did you understand that that's stated as a fact? It's not a fact. To be a scientific fact, you have to comply with the scientific method. You have to observe something. Well, of course, common descent was not observed. Then you have to make a hypothesis based on your observation. And then you have to test your hypothesis. And then you have to have repeatable results. None of that happened, except for the hypothesis part. Lots of those, they're changing all the time. Okay, folks, I want you to send in your questions, your comments. I will address those on the show. Love to hear from you. And tell your friends at church about this show. Let them know how they can find it. And you might even talk to your pastor about having a creation speaker in. Have them give me a call. Okay, or hosting a creation event like a seminar. And I have invited all the Tri-City superintendents, board members, and even science teachers to come on the show and defend the way they're teaching evolution in their classrooms. but none of them will do it. I wonder why. Okay, and before I introduce my guest, I want to highlight one ministry today, one creation ministry. It's called Search for the Truth Ministries. Bruce Malone is the director. He's up in Michigan, and this is a wonderful ministry. Check it out on your Google it and find out more about it on your spare time and in your internet. Their Search for the Truth Ministries. Amazing thing that they do that no other creation ministry does. They reach children in high schools by the thousands and tens of thousands. There's no other creation ministry that reaches kids directly like this ministry does. They go to countries like Fiji and the Philippines and the Cook Islands, other small South Pacific islands that will let them in. The government officially sanctions them to come in and speak to their students, and they give them a hardbound, beautiful, full-color book that tells them they weren't created from sea slime. They were created individually by God, the Creator. And many of these students, they don't have possessions, and to have a nice book like this is a big deal, and they share it with their family and their friends and reread it over and over again. So it's a neat ministry. Check it out when you get a chance. And my guest today is Dr. Thomas Kindell. He has a ministry. He lives in Oregon, and his ministry is called Search for the...
It's called Reasons for Faith.
Reasons for Faith. Okay, Reasons for Faith.
Yeah.
And that's a takeoff on Hugh Ross's...
Hugh Ross's Reason to Believe Ministries. I pondered that when I decided to name my ministry, and I thought I'd make it Reasons for Faith in case somebody was searching on the internet. They might get me by mistake and get, I think, a better defense of the book of Genesis.
Okay, so it's Reasons for Faith, and Reasons to Believe is Hugh Ross's
ministry. Yes.
Ministry. Okay. And so it's kind of a takeoff on that. And Hugh Ross, if you don't know who he is a old earth creationist. He's quite popular in the old earth creation realm. And he is an astronomer, I believe, by training.
PhD in astronomy.
He has quite a bit of books that he peddles out there. And and so he has an influence and it's because we are young earth creationists, it's good to make a differentiation between the two. Would you give us that how are the young earth and the old earth creationists different? Who are their audiences, and how can we address that?
Well, the main difference, of course, is that the old earth and the young earth creationists are Christians. They believe in the deity of Christ, his virgin birth, his bodily resurrection, his imminent return. So all the foundational doctrines of Christ we would agree on. We disagree on the interpretation of the book of Genesis, especially the first 11 chapters, down to about the Tower of Babel. And the classic position of the church from the founding of the New Testament church in the first century up until only about 200 some years ago, and this was both the early church, the Catholic Church, the Protestant church after Luther, all of them up until about 200 years ago believed that creation was 6 literal days, as described in Genesis, only several thousands of years ago that there was a global flood, and that these were literal historical facts. But about 200 years ago, we had the dawning of the so-called Age of Enlightenment. And these philosophers like Hume and others, didn't really refute the biblical account. They just said, we don't like it, we are going to worship our rationale, and we're going to look for evidence that will refute it. And some of the things they came up with weren't really any good at all. In fact, the evidence they have today is not very good because it's based on assumptions that are tagged to the assumption that evolution is true in the first place. Radiometric dating being a prime example of that. You have 3 major assumptions in radioisotope dating. Now, they call it absolute dating, which to me is an absolute crock, because if it's absolute, you can prove it absolutely. But when it's inherent that you have 3 assumptions that you simply have to assume to be able to even start the equation, and you don't know for sure that those assumptions are correct. You cannot prove scientifically they are correct. You don't know what happened in the past to disrupt the parent-daughter isotope. We do have strong evidence that the rate of decay was exponentially more rapid in the past than what it is today. That has tremendous impact on how old those rocks are.
Is that from the rate study?
That's from the RATE study, which is an acronym for Radioisotopes and the Age of the Earth, which was an initiative by the Institute for Creation Research and other creationist organizations. And it, of course, proved that we have this byproduct of radioactive decay that is inevitably produced by chemistry and physics. There's no way to get out of it. So when you have alpha decay, that means like a parent isotope like uranium-238 decays into the final daughter product of lead-206. 8 times along that decay chain, it throws out an alpha particle. Now, an alpha particle has 2 protons and 2 neutrons, so it's chemically identical to the nucleus of a helium-4 gas atom. So when it is thrown out, excuse me, during the decay process, it picks up a couple donor electrons from the environment and becomes full-blown helium gas. Now, the problem is that if it's been decaying very, very slowly over billions of years, as they claim, then that byproduct has been also leaking out slowly during that time, except it leaks rather fast. Because at the atomic level, rocks are not solid. They're very porous. They have all kinds of cracks and fissures at that microscopic level. And helium-4 is a noble gas. That means it doesn't like to attach or bond to anything. You could say it's like Teflon, it just doesn't want to stick to anything. So it won't get stuck. It will work through this porous rock. It gets up to the surface of the Earth. The average leakage is measured to be about 13 million helium atoms per square inch per second leaking out of that radioactive decay. So it's impossible for it to have been leaking for billions of years and still be in the original host zircon crystals in the basement granitic rocks.
Yes.
They date to be about 1.5 billion years old. So we can count today, we have instruments capable of actually counting atoms, and we can count exactly how many lead-206 atoms are there. You take that number, multiply it by 8, and that tells you exactly how many helium gas atoms were produced as a byproduct. Now, we know the amount, and we can see how much is leaked out. It's been leaking out of these zircon crystals at such a rate that less than half of it is leaked out. At the present rate of leakage, it would take somewhere only about 6,000 plus or minus 2,000 years. So in 12 to 15,000 years, excuse me, this Arizona dry air gets me. I'm from Oregon, you know, I wet my whistle here.
Well,
so within 12 to 15,000 years, it should have leaked completely out of the crystal. With millions of years, it should have leaked out of the crust of the Earth, into the atmosphere, into outer space. There should be practically no, very, very little measurable helium byproduct gas from radioactive decay. But instead, the majority of it, over 50%, is still trapped in the original zircon crystals. So what this means is that rapid decay put a lot of it there as a byproduct so recently that it hasn't even had time to leak out of the crystals yet. And it would leak out completely within 12 to 15,000 years.
Right.
Evidently, the crust of the Earth is much less than that. So we're still working on trying to figure out how that rapid decay took place. It apparently was something to do with the creation of the Earth itself. But we have the smoking gun. We have the byproduct there that simply can't hang around. Unless it was put there rapidly and recently, it would have leaked out a long time ago over these billions of years. It couldn't possibly be there, but it's there.
Yes. And Dr. Robert Gentry did work on the zircon crystals.
Right.
And they
halos
found these halos.
Right.
And tell us about the halos.
Well, the halos are produced by the outthrowing of these alpha particles. And they have enough energy to do some damage in the rocks. And different isotopes will throw out these alpha particles at different energy rates. So some of them are lower velocity, some are higher velocity, and will penetrate further into the rock. So they put a concentric sphere of damage around that little inclusion of radioactive element. And you can tell by the pattern that it produces what kind of element it is, because they all have almost like a fingerprint. This element produces this type of spherical damage in the rock when it decays. So we have found, those in rocks that apparently indicate that rapid decay indeed did take place. Maybe it gets a little bit complicated, but we have a lot of good arguments for it in addition to the radiogenic helium. But to me, the strongest indication of the problem with their dating of geology is that we have virtually every bone or piece of wood or coal Now, in some cases, bones are completely mineralized. All the organic material has been replaced with minerals, like petrified wood, okay? Very little, if any, wood left there that isn't mineralized.
Yes.
So that would not be amenable to carbon-14 dating. But we do find in the fossil record wood that's only partially fossilized, or even not much fossilized at all, still wood, and it's way down in these layers they claim are hundreds of millions of years old. When you test it for carbon-14, it has very measurable amounts of carbon-14 in it. Now, the problem with carbon-14 is that its half-life is relatively short. It's only 5,730 years. So if you have a pound of carbon-14 in the environment, in 57 centuries, half of that disappears. Goes back to nitrogen-14. Another 57 centuries, half of that is gone. Then another half. After 10 half-lives, which is less than 60,000 years, you'd have almost an undetectable trace. Once it gets past 100,000 years, very difficult to detect. Yeah. And theoretically, after 250,000 years, not a single atom of carbon-14 could still be there that has not decayed back into nitrogen-14. So when you find things that are supposed to be hundreds of millions of years old, dinosaur bones that are only partially mineralized still have organic material in them that can be dated. Coal, supposed to be hundreds of millions of years old. Old wood, that's supposed to be hundreds of millions of years old. And in every case, they have very measurable amounts of carbon-14 in it. What does that tell you? It can't possibly be as old as what they're dating it to be.
Tells us it's quite young, actually.
Yes.
So this is more of a technical kind of evidence that I normally don't get into because
well, I didn't know how technical you want to get. I can.
Because we probably don't have a lot of scientists watching this show. And I neglected to get into your own personal background. So can you just tell us about your how you got into the creation ministry and what your educational background is?
Well, I grew up. Kind of shot myself in the foot because I love dinosaurs so much. My older brother, who is unfortunately still an atheist evolutionist today, he kind of got me interested in science at a young age, and he was more into physics and astronomy, but I loved biology and paleontology even more. And I loved the dinosaurs. I'd go down to the public school as a little kid when other guys were out playing ball and everything. I was out there reading every book I could get my hands on about dinosaurs, and that was kind of my childhood fantasy to grow up and be a professional paleontologist and dig up dinosaur bones and put them on display at the American Museum of Natural History. And I thought, what a fun job. So I memorized the geological column, memorized most all the dinosaurs, would impress people with how much I knew about the great unifying principle of biology called evolution. And I thoroughly believed it, but later on, as I became a young adult, it began to bother me, the philosophical implications, because if evolution is true, we're just evolved animals, products of chance, when you ask the most important philosophical questions a man asks in this life, who am I, why am I here, what's my purpose and meaning in life, how should I treat other people, and where am I going to go when I die, evolution gives some pretty horrific answers. Right. Who are you? You're nothing, you're nobody, you're a product of chance. Right. You weren't created with a purpose and with a plan. You don't have, you're not made in the image of God. You don't have any real value, any more than any other living creature. And when you die, you will rot back into plant fertilizer, and that will be the end of you forever. Mm-hmm. You have no spiritual nature that will survive the grave. You might have been the king of the world and everybody loved you, but you'll never remember that when you die. And when they all die, they'll never remember you ever existed either. So what is the purpose of your existence if when everybody dies, nobody will ever remember we were ever here or achieved anything at all? So it seemed to me to be just a philosophy of hopelessness, and it bothered me. And I had heard the gospel of Christ and everything. I thought, well, that sounds good, but I don't want to believe that just because it sounds good. I want to know it's true.
So you weren't raised in a Christian home?
No, not really. I was raised in a liberal home where they taught evolution. Actually, I was raised in the Catholic Church, and the church that I was in was not charismatic or anything, and they basically said God did everything by evolution except God took an ape man or something, put a soul in him, and that was Adam. Mm-hmm. And even as a young student, I thought, boy, that sounded bizarre, So why not just admit evolution is completely true rather than try to tack on some religious significance to it?
Yeah, but that's not what the Bible says.
No, it's not at all what the Bible says. But
forget that part.
They taught me not to read the Bible because I would not understand it.
That's right. And, don't you worry about that. We'll do that for you.
Yeah. But anyway, so later on, I wanted to be anything but an evangelical Christian, because whenever I challenged Christians, well, yeah, your gospel sounds good, but how do I know your Bible is true? Because it's contradicted by carbon-14, radioisotope dating, dinosaur fossils, etc. And they basically said, well, God said it, I believe it, that settles it. I said, well, the Muslims say the same thing. The Quran says it, I believe it, that settles it.
Right.
Buddha said this, I believe it, that settles it. So that's not good enough. Where's the objective evidence? And none of them had any, I could have become a Christian sooner if somebody had some good answers. But my sister finally got saved, and she began to really preach at me, and she said, well, God is real, and he'll prove it to you. I was having horrible migraine headaches at the time for the first time in my life. She says, come to church, we'll pray for you, God will heal you. And I thought, oh, yeah, right, But anyway, I loved my sister, so I went with her, and all these people were so happy. I thought, man, if these people are deluded, they're better off than me. At least they're happy. I'm kind of miserable. But they did give an invitation, and I just felt like, wow, God, I'd prayed that if you're real, if you exist, give me a sign. And I didn't ask for a big sign like the parting of the Red Sea. I just wanted to see that there were other people whose lives had been changed in a positive way, like my sisters had, because I'd never seen that before. Mm-hmm. And this whole room of people in this church everybody was happy and, full of joy. And it was like God, I felt in my spirit, spoke to me and said, well, here's your answer. All of these people's lives I've changed, So when they gave the altar call, I accepted the Lord. And I then heard about, I still didn't know how to refute evolution. I'd believed it since I was knee high, and, I'd memorized so many things, and I just knew that God was real, because they did pray for me and did heal me. I never had another migraine in my life.
Great.
And so I felt, God is real, and he
Wonderful.
did change my life. But I felt called to the ministry at first, and I went off to a Bible college in Texas that actually used Institute for Creation Research material in their apologetics courses, which was spot on what I needed, because it answered all these questions that had stumped all these other evangelicals, and answered it logically and scientifically and mathematically, which I respected. And so I thought, I don't have to be ashamed to be a Christian or to believe.
Let me just stop you for a second and say that the Institute for Creation Research is one of the big three creation organizations out there, and it's at the end of the programs we put up the main creation science websites, and that's going to be one of them. Lots of good teaching from Creation Research Institute. They have a great history. They're probably the second oldest creation organization in existence. So tell us more about the teaching you got from them.
Well, they told me that if I wanted to get more detailed study and advanced study, to go to the Institute for Creation Research, which I did actually years later after I had already got seminary degrees and everything. Because at first I thought I was going to be, a pastor or, a seminary professor or something like that. And only later after that, I realized that God was calling me to do a traveling apologetics ministry on the Christian apologetics, but majoring in the field of creation science apologetics. So I eventually went to the graduate school of the Institute for Creation Research, who back at that time had an accredited graduate school offering accredited graduate degrees in natural and applied science at the master's level, not the doctoral level. My doctorate is in philosophy of theology, majoring in biblical apologetics.
Philosophy of theology.
Right. Biblical philosophy.
Okay. Philosophy of theology.
Right. Yes.
What is that?
Well, the field
I know what philosophy is, and I know what theology is.
Okay.
How do we put them together?
Well, philosophy literally comes from the Greek philo or phileo, love, and sophia means wisdom. So it literally means the love of wisdom. But philosophy, of course, can apply. You get a PhD, which literally means a doctor of philosophy in just about any field, if you put in the work and everything. But it's philosophy of theology. I majored in the philosophy of biblical apologetics. In other words, the wisdom of giving an answer, which we're commanded to in Scripture. Be ready always to give an answer to anyone who asks you a reason for the hope that is within you, with meekness and reverence.
1 Peter 3:15.
Yeah, in giving an answer, we use philosophy and logic and evidence. We don't just say, well, the Bible says it. We also say the Bible says this, but here's good reasons why this Bible is true and why philosophy and evidence and science supports it. It makes more sense to believe this than to believe anything else.
Okay, so your doctorate really is in biblical apologetics, is what you're really saying.
Right, yeah. I got master's level training at the Institute for Creation Research back in the day when they still had their graduate school.
Yes.
But my doctorate, is in biblical philosophy.
Okay.
Majoring in apologetics.
And folks, if you don't know what apologetics is, it's a Greek word, just means answer or defense. You're giving an answer for the questions that people have about your faith. You're defending your faith.
Yes, it's ironic that in English, to apologize means to say, I'm wrong and I'm sorry. but in the Greek it says, I'm right, and here's why I'm right.
Yes.
It's totally different.
Here's the reasons.
Yeah, totally different
Okay.
meaning.
All right, and you started this ministry what year?
I did my first creation science presentation back in the summer of 1977 at the Grand Canyon, of all places.
1977. You actually started here in Arizona, the Grand Canyon. Awesome. That's great. And so, Brother Kindell, we're going to have to wrap it up here now, but I just really appreciate your ministry. You have a rather unique ministry, and tell us a little bit, we got about a minute left, so
Okay.
Tell us about your website and tell us how many different talks you have that you have on DVD that we can get.
I have some 33 different creation science and Christian apologetic presentations on DVD, and not all of them are listed on the website. I'm actually going to change that website later this year, but I'll have to put a notice on there what the new web address is and everything. But the current one is www.Kindell, my last name, Kindell, NW Creation, which stands for Northwest Creation Organization, which hosted up in Seattle, Washington.
Okay.
So www.kindell.nwcreation.net.
That'll be on the screen.
Yeah, okay. And actually, you can't order directly the DVDs off my website. I don't have it set up with PayPal or anything, but if you call the phone number on there, then you can use Visa or MasterCard and order over the phone.
Okay.
DVDs are $15 individually. If you pay for 3, you get a fourth one free. So you get a deal at 4 for $45 if you want to do that. And that continues on. If you buy another 3, you get another one free. You pay for another 3, you get another one free. So it
Yes.
keeps going like that.
Excellent deals there, and I have quite a few of myself. And you're an excellent teacher. You're methodical, and you explain things where everybody can get it.
I try to. You know,
Oftentimes, it's very complex information
right.
that you're giving, and but you break it down so that it can be understood by us, and we appreciate you for that. And so we will do another show, and I just want to thank you for being my guest on this show here of the Creation Corner.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here.
God bless, brother. And folks, thank you for tuning in for this edition of the Creation Corner. I sure appreciate that. And do check out Dr. Kindell's website. Find out if you get a chance what the 33 DVD lessons are that he has. Order some if you're interested. I really have learned a lot from Dr. Kindell. I think you will too. God bless. Bye-bye.